Hello and welcome to GuyLogicGaming. My name is Temko and this is Stellaris Apocalypse, the 2.0 expansion for Stellaris, and this expansion has a massive amount of changes to the core gameplay. In fact, it has so many changes that my original review is basically no longer accurate. And there is a lot to talk about with this expansion because it changes a lot of core things. So let's go ahead and dive straight on in. First things first, I strongly urge that if you do not currently own the Utopia expansion or some of the other expansions already available for Stellaris, to get those as well whenever they're on a sale, or if you can afford them right away, because they do add all those extra flavors of content that 2.0 builds on further. Now, they're not required, but they do make a world of difference in terms of depth and overall gameplay viability. Those anecdotes aside, it is well known that I absolutely love Stellaris as a game. I think I have 200 hours in the title, which for me is an insane amount of time. So I may not be the most unbiased person when it comes to Stellaris, as I just simply love the title. Nonetheless, there are a lot of changes in 2.0 which I don't like from the outset when I first read about them, when I first got my hands on the game, but they have definitely grown on me immensely. Now, whether or not that is Stockholm Syndrome because I just love this game so much, I'll leave up to you. For the rest, let's go ahead and dive straight on into some of the biggest changes. And the biggest change by far is the removal of 2 out of 3 hyper travel options. The only one available is hyperlane travel, which means that warp gates and general warp are no longer available in the game in any way, shape, or form. Asterisk. Which means that to travel from system to system, you have to use the various lines that connect the systems, and this goes for all civilizations. Some other changes they have been able to do because of this change have created a much more dynamic and interesting strategic look at the world map in many regards, and they have also allowed for some secondary systems to be re-evaluated. The major reason they did this change is so they could make specific impacts on systems, specific changes that would attack movement, mobility, defensibility, and border expansion. So let me go ahead and dive into that and explain the change itself, and then explain the consequences of this change into that and other systems. As I said, 2 out of 3 warp travel options are gone, so only hyperlanes are available. They've added a new slider in the settings menu for your startup game where you can change how many hyperlanes are available on average per system. Obviously, the default is 1.0, and you can move that slider up or down as you would with available AI races and all that stuff. This change allows them to make more strategic choices in terms of core important systems, which not only means that you can now have a bottleneck system. Maybe your empire is focused on defending just that one system with a large standing army against all outside threats, and then you don't have any other defenses, or at least no heavy defenses or fleets or anything like that spread across your empire. Maybe you have allies on the other end buffering you from enemies ever getting to you, because, simply said, they don't have access to technology that could help them get to you. The lines are redrawn, and actual map control is actually important. So the early land grab of most 4Xs still matters here, but it also matters which land you grab, not just that you have a lot of it. That said, they have also changed the way borders work, and now they are a lot more coherent and consistent. No longer will your border stretch across 2 ravines of space across a 4 spiral outcropping, because honestly, the AI across from you that you can never reach even though your border touches them is not going to have any border friction with you, because they literally know you cannot get to them. It's an amazing change that allows for actual localized politics and regional politics between you and various races, and those allow for escalation into the late game global map coverage. The map change now goes around which systems you own, and because owned systems has never really been a thing in Stellaris, the way they do that now is that you have to build a specific building in a system that then allows the game to know that this system is mine. This star-based system is immensely interesting, though a little bit convoluted in terms of how they do it. From a gameplay perspective, it adds a certain level of control to expansion and rate of expansion as well. So you can't just go out and grab every system, you have to think ahead. So where you could previously build outposts on various locations and then build around those outposts to gather 1 or 2 systems around you, you now have to build the sort of same outposts in every system. They have a cost, they also cost influence, and they have a small maintenance cost. Now this might seem like a very bad thing indeed, but the difference is that now you need these to even be able to colonize planets in that system. And more importantly, Those outposts now also by default function as both shipyards for crafting ships as well as the defense post in that system, which means that no longer do you have to build various different defense outposts and hanging floating fortresses to defend a system you find important. You just upgrade that one building to the wazoo with gun turrets and rocket launchers and shield generators and various disruption materials. So you can do FTL inhibitors, you can do tracking software, things that you previously did have in the game but never really got used because fights never really took place in those systems. Now you might be thinking, well, what does it matter? One of those defensive locations are still only going to be able to defend early game against a small fleet. And when it gets late game, somebody comes with a stack of death and doom, how is that gonna help me when I have a 3k defensive structure? And the answer is, it will, because stacks of doom are becoming less of a thing. Now, they're not completely gone, don't get me wrong. If somebody still has 10 times the army amount you have, they will still waltz all over you. But the difference now is, because of the changes in the way hypertravel works, is that larger empires are harder to defend. You have to physically move your ships from A to B to C to D to get to the location of a fight. And if you have good sensors, you can see them coming and get the hell out of there. This means that enemies, and yourself of course, are going to need multiple fleets to patrol their areas, be stationed in multiple locations, and no longer do fleets need to be stationed around occupied planets. So if you have an area of your empire that is resource rich, but is not great for habitable planets, no longer do you have to hang a very expensive to maintain and upkeep fleet there. You can now just put them in orbit in a defensive structure, maybe in a place with a black hole that has a lot of research points. You just upgrade the defensive structure in that system, and there's that. Or maybe it's a key system for your defense structure, where your ships can branch out into multiple locations and quickly strike at enemies attacking you. All these strategic choices, due to the change in the way hypertravel works and in the way borders work, and with the change in how you claim systems, combined result in more strategic depth, more choices for you as a player, more things you need to manage, more things you can think of, and more choices you have available to deal damage to enemies and how to defend yourself against that. So no longer are you going to be looking at an enemy empire and saying, oh, they're equivalent technology and equivalent fleet size, so they'll have an army of 5k. You'll now be thinking, okay, so they have a big empire and they have a couple of planets there and a couple of planets here. So if I attack with my 2.5k fleet here and my 6k fleet here, I may be able to pull them out of position and then move my fleet back away because I have emergency warp, or maybe I'll just pull them in closer and closer. Maybe I'll raid with a different fleet in a different sector and they have to split their fleet and I'll cluster in from multiple angles. You now actually have movement and strategy that does not exist out of you just throwing your army against their army and seeing whoever has an army left at the end. And after that, just pressing Alt F4, because the point your army dies to the stack of death is game over. One battle, that's it. And now you have choices and options to strategize for invasions as well as defensive wars. But that in itself would not solve a stack of death. What developers then did is limit the amount of fleet size you can have per fleet. So each fleet has to have a commander, and you can have a limit of about 30 ships, which you can upgrade with technology and research and all that stuff to bigger fleets. And more ships in a fleet is just simply not possible. Now, obviously, again, this would not solve anything, as you could just have 3 fleets moving to the same location, and all you'd have is the need to get 3 admirals to lead those fleets, which would cost you leaderships and all that stuff. In itself, that might be a slight disadvantage to having multiple fleets, but all it really does is increase micro. The developers thought of this, and what they've done is actually pretty ingenious. Not only do you have multiple fleets, but again, because of those various different needs for leadership, of those various different changes they've done to ships as well, which I'll get into in a moment, you now need multiple armies in multiple locations. So you'll have an army, for example, on the north side of your empire, and then on the south side of your empire, and you may have a small marauding force moving around looking for pirates, which have also been changed. Now you're thinking ahead, and now you're planning your fleets ahead. All these additional changes are pretty damn good to facilitate strategic mid to late game thinking and planning, and allow for options for you as a player in terms of empire control, army control, and smart warfare. So this won't change the micro you're dealing with, except that the developers also thought ahead of that and made a fleet management system. So now you can make fleet templates and use those templates to build new fleets. So if your fleet got damaged in a fight and you just want to remember that I have 4 cruisers and 2 destroyers and 1 battleship, you can just make a template, save that template, and just say reinforce this fleet so it's up and running again with the ships it needs. This additional system is the reason why, even though you have multiple fleets and the fleets are smaller and you have to make and maintain control over multiple locations, because the change to the fleet management system and some changes to ship management, which I'll get into in a second, this allows you to still have that fine-tuned control without a obtuse and annoying amount of micromanagement. Again, the same applies for the way map control works with the borders now. You know exactly where your borders are going to end because you have exact control over which systems you've claimed. And more than that, you know exactly how your empire is going to grow in relation to other empires. No longer are you going to have to avoid the next closest 50 star systems to a fallen empire because you know exactly how far your border will stretch now when you go ahead and claim those systems. It makes it for a more controlled environment without needing more micromanagement or obtuse calculations to figure out where the hell your border is going to end. Overall, as I mentioned at the start, I really hated that they removed 2 out of the 3 fast travel hyperlane options. But the changes they've done because they did that are uniformly across the board all amazing, well thought out changes, and I wholeheartedly approve of them. That, and they've still left some wormholes in the game that are pre-spawned in locations that you can use to travel between locations on the other side of a randomized star system. So while controlled wormholes are gone, you can still take control over existing wormholes. And that, again, creates more depth, more options, even in diplomacy, where you suddenly might now have access to a star system and an empire on the other side of the map to be an ally or an enemy. And that is pretty damn cool. As I mentioned, the way things are done now is that more map control is important, knowing which systems you have is important. Another change the developers have done is put a much heavier weight on the mineral cost for ship upkeep, which means that having a stationary massive fleet at all times up to your cap limit, which is how it always used to get played, might not be the most beneficial choice you have to continue growth of your empire. So now you're going to have to balance more so than previously, which is still not extremely so, the amount of ships you build, the amount of empire fleets you have versus how much resources you take in to grow your systems. This is also fairly interesting, and now in those same star bases you can now build multiple shipyards, which will allow you to stockpile resources, and again that makes stockpiling actually useful again to build multiple ships at the same time with multiple shipyards. So that means that theoretically your opponent could think ahead and say, oh, this guy has an inferior fleet to me, I'll just go in, waltz all over him, declare war on you, and between him declaring war and him walking in, you can burn through a massive stockpile of resources and pump out a couple of fleets and smash his head in. And that is pretty damn cool. Talking about those fleets, talking about those ships, changes have been made to the way ship design works and the way ship upgrades work. So previously, if you designed a ship and you built a ship, you could also upgrade that ship step by step by updating the design and then going into the fleet manager and then updating those separate fleets and ships all separately with the new updates and all that stuff. It was a little bit annoying and fiddly to do. Now what they've done is they've made a best in class, which is not best in class in any way, but each type of ship you have, so a corvette, a destroyer, a cruiser, etc., is going to have a auto best variant. And this auto best variant is going to be the one that the game builds pre-hand. So you can always make your own designs if you want them, but this is the design the game makes, and they will, whenever you do new research, new technology, new weapons that are available, they will automatically update this template and make it available for your upgrades to your various ships you have already built. And that is pretty damn cool, removes a little bit of micromanagement. The other change is, of course, you can still make your own templates, but the change here is that some things have been altered in how they work. For example, the various computers that you had for AI control, so destroyers had the aggressive attack computer and all that stuff, has been changed into being computers for a different type of interaction the ship is going to have in terms of combat. So you're going to be able to do various ships, like the corvette has swarm attacks for default but doesn't have long range attack, and the destroyer can have a picket line variant where it will try to keep its medium distance and bombard the enemy with long range. So you can now specialize ships and ship fleets into specific actions. So if you want to make a ship fleet that has a front facing quick attacking group and a rear hanging maybe heavy hitter group with long range attacks, you can do so now, and that is pretty damn cool. And if you want to mix in a couple of ships that are able to take a beating, take a lot of punishment up front, maybe they have gun turrets or flak turrets, they can take down missiles of the enemy ships as your lighter and smaller ships sort of fly in there to do damage. These ships can defend them. You now have those options by the changes the developers have made. On top of that, the way the reactors work, where you could plumb down as many reactors as you needed, provided you had space. And it was always a game of balancing, do I add a shield? Do I add a reactor? How can I remove a reactor, add another shield? This little sort of mix and match has been removed a little bit by just making every ship have one reactor, and this reactor automatically upgrades to the next tier when the next tier of reactors is available. So you have cold fusion, and then you have null point and all that stuff by default, and you'll just have more energy available up to a flat line for every tier of ship, which means you can use all the slots that are available to slot in armor, weapons, shields, and all this other extra goodies. They've also added a couple of different new things you can research and unlock and upgrade that will spice up your various ships further. Overall, the changes to ships themselves are not that impressive or comprehensively changing. There are a couple of things shifted around and fine-tuned to be a little less annoying. The interesting thing is that they've redone ship balance and they've redone ship cost to an extent, which means that the balance in terms of ships and meta, which has been pretty stagnant over the last year or so, is going to get shifted again, and I'm really curious what people are going to dream up in terms of fleet compositions and ship compositions overall. And if you have an idea, do leave that in the comments down below. I am genuinely curious. Now, moving on from fleet management. Say you have your big fleets, you have your choke points of your empire defended, you have everything you need, your technology is superior, and your opponent just has that one star system that has that rare resource, and you damn well want it. How do you go about warfare? What has changed in terms of diplomacy and overall activity? Now, diplomacy itself, in my opinion, hasn't really changed at all. You still have mostly the same options. A couple of things have been altered a little bit, because, for example, as soon as you meet an empire, you get knowledge on all their star systems. This is because there is no actual need to explore or survey those star systems, because the main reason to survey star systems is to learn what's in them and to get anomalies. But you can't and never could get anomalies from star systems of other players that were already owned by another empire, so why would you need to send your ships into their systems to figure out what was in them? So developers sort of scrapped that. I still don't really agree, because one of the major advantages of surveying is leveling up your scientists in a low-key manner, and that is being curbed quite a bit now, especially in busier matches. So you can focus on star systems that haven't been explored and knowing what those star systems might still have anomalies for you. So as I mentioned, you want to get to war. Let's get to it. What do? You declare war and you say, I want your planets. What has changed? Well, everything. The previous war score system is gone. The previous method of getting concessions is gone. The previous way you did star system swapping is gone. None of that is in here. What you do is you lay claim to systems you want. And you lay claim to systems based on your influence you spend on those systems. So I'll go to map mode, claim that system, and say, I want to pay for this system, and whenever we have a war, the reason is this system, so I have a reason to go to war with you. And they may counterclaim their own systems on your end and all that stuff. So you can build up sort of a rhetoric with your enemies and saying, I want to claim that system. Obviously, claiming another player's or AI system is not going to be great for your diplomatic channels. So your reputation is going to tank quite a bit the more you claim. That said, you can claim them, and then when there's a war and you attack those systems, it's going to be about those systems. So you're not going to end up saying, I want to claim this system on the other side of the map, and I'm going to have a war on the very other side of the map. You're also not going to have empires keep refusing to surrender because they're allies on the other side of the map that will never get to you because they have to cross 15 different empires. Aren't tired of the war, so you now have an enemy that is decimated, all their planets are occupied, everything they have is destroyed, you have marauded across their lands and they are still refusing to surrender and end the war, and all you have left is, well, let's call it a white piece and go back to how it was. So now there is a war fatigue score. The longer the war lasts, the more fatigue you and your opponent get, the more losses they take, the more empires you claim, the more raids there are, the more systems are taken, the higher that war fatigue is. And instead of the previous system where you could get points for doing something, I guess, you now genuinely see how far along you are, what your advantages, what your disadvantages, and how you're in standing. If you win a war by fully destroying your opponent, you lay claim to all systems you have claimed. But as I mentioned, the changes to fleets and how fleet combat works, which I'll get into in a second, God, there's a lot to talk about, are going to make that a lot trickier than previously where you just had one big-ass army smash down on your opponent, even if you are more superior. So when you lay claim to these systems, you now have them, you keep them after you win. But because each system now has a starbase in it, you have to defeat those starbases. And because it's no longer just systems with planets or fleets that are defended strongly and properly, it can be random systems with starbases because those systems are deemed important for whatever reason they might be, you might have a very heavy fight on your hands without there ever being a fleet involved. Or if there is a fleet involved, you may need to send your bigger fleet to deal with a subsystem somewhere along the line and leave yourself exposed to counterattacks by their fleets. Strategic depth, more options, more availability, damn good. When you win a war, you get the concessions or you don't get the concessions, you get a couple of systems, you don't get a couple of systems. That is pretty much as it was with the same diplomatic impacts, and you can still recruit allies and still create non-aggression pacts and defensive pacts and all that stuff. So I think nothing really fundamentally changed in the idea of warfare, but the way you calculate who's actually winning a war, that has been redone and displayed much cleaner, much simpler, much better now. There are a couple of different changes as well to fleets and fleet stacks. You no longer have the stack of doom. One of these changes obviously is smaller fleets. Another is that the way empires work, you want to have to build multiple fleets, and because the way system defenses work, attacking multiple systems is more important. All these changes encourage you to have multiple fleets. Another reason is bigger fleets attacking smaller fleets have less of an advantage now. Now, obviously, if you have a 10,000 point fleet and the enemy has 500 points, you're just gonna stomp all over them. But if you're talking about a 2.5k fleet versus a 2.0k fleet, or a 10k fleet versus a 12k fleet, these smaller changes, this smaller range is going to result in the smaller fleet having better focused fire, better attack range, going to have a little bit of a buff to give a sort of a underdog chance to deal with you. More fleets, more attacks, more combat. Pretty damn good, which means that even if you might have a slightly smaller army, you're not going to have a disproportionately bigger loss. What previously happened in Stellaris is if two armies, one 10,000, one 20,000, fought in a very straight up manner, you'd expect that the 10,000 army would lose, and they will, and that the 20,000 point army would take 7,000 points of damage. I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, but to give you an idea, what happened in reality was due to the death stacking and the way combat worked, the 10,000 point army would face the 20,000 point army, and then you'd have a 0 point army facing a 19,000 point army, because that's the way the stacking worked in terms of combat. Now, if they fight, it's going to be closer to that 7,000 point damage loss. And that is a damn good thing, because that removes the single fight attack, destroying everything. A second change made, and this is also very important to the interaction for combat fleets, when you have an engagement, ships are more likely to get out, they're more likely to warp away individually, they're more likely to break away if needed, and running away with your ship's fleet might actually be a smart tactic. So you might have a combat encounter with between 2 or 3 10k fleets, and you would have 30k worth of army fighting. At the end of it, when the enemy's army is vanquished and you have a decisive victory over the opponent, they might still end up keeping a 5k army out of that 10k, and you'd have destroyed 5k, and out of your 10k you may have lost 2.5k because you were better, etc, etc. So you still have a overwhelming victory, but you don't have a absolute victory where you can just sort of do a parade round over their planets and throw nukes down on their civilization. You're still going to have to fight them. Their army is going to retreat, they can hopefully reinforce it with resources, and they can throw a punch your direction. Obviously, your fleet is damaged, so you might need to retreat, you may need a second fleet to cover, or you could have a multiple fleet, harass, deal with the opponent, prevent them from getting reinforcements. This secondary change is, I think, the most important one. The sort of underdog boost creates more damage output, keeping the damage impact of a war more equal between actual investment versus actual loss. And the way retreating now works in those changes results in fights not being absolute, but having sequels in more combat later down the line, because you don't lose everything. You might lose the fleet, you might lose most of your ships, you might lose your admiral, you'll probably lose the system, and maybe lose the war even, because the score count and the war fatigue will add up for that loss. But you might still have a fleet, a smaller one, but still a viable fleet to harass, fight with, and sort of claw your way back. That is damn good. Everything I've talked about right now has been about how fleet combat works, how ship movement works, how now you build your empire, because most of the changes here in Apocalypse are about that. One change I have not talked about is the way technology has been changed. Previously, Stellaris had 3 tiers of technology, and they were sort of a little bit flexible. You could have Tier 1 stuff being researched while at the same time while Tier 3 stuff is being researched, depending on what choices you took. And this can still happen if you're really focused on just getting those specific things. But previously, it would be very common to be researching Tier 3 high-end technologies while still needing to build your second tier power plant, for example. Now those changes, with 5 tiers of research, allow for more sliced and more controlled progression to the tech trees, and this also plays better into the overall availability of technology and upgrades in the game. So now instead of just pumping through with one particular tech tree, going straight to tier 3 or tier 5 in this case, you gradually unlock second tier, third tier, fourth tier, fifth tier based on your overall research scope and your overall progression in technology. This smooths out a couple of issues I've had previously with technology, and it also clearly marks a gradual movement forward, which is really cool. So you'll move forward little bit by little bit, gradual piece by gradual piece, and that is pretty damn good. Some other miscellaneous changes are things like balance changes, bunch of bug fixes, and stuff like that. They've added a couple of new base civilizations, they've added some new edicts, they've added some new civics, all this stuff you already expect from any Stellaris expansion and update. There really isn't a lot to talk about in these. Some are good, some are bad, some may not be to your taste or preference, some may just be situational things to play out around with. The interesting thing is that most of these new changes are all related in how you build your empire and how you can deal with your entire control and zone of control in terms of combat, diplomacy, and resource allocation. And the same applies for terraforming planets and taking control of them. By having the system, you can use those planets. By having the system, you can build outposts. By having those systems and star bases, you can build mining facilities, etc. In general, even though I was against many of these changes when I read about them, they are pretty damn good in terms of what the developers have done with the game. I feel they make it for a smarter, more strategic, deeper title than it was previously. They've added a lot of needed depth, a lot of needed challenge, and a lot of needed ideas. I hardly feel that this 2.0 Apocalypse expansion could just as well have been released as a separate game entirely, because it is that big, it is that comprehensive, and it does so many very cool things in terms of base gameplay design. Now there's many other changes in Apocalypse. As I mentioned, pirates have been changed, so they now spawn throughout most of the mid to late game even. They have made changes to the way ship combat works and how missiles work. For now, missiles ignore shields completely, they go straight to the hull. They've made a ton of changes in many of these things, and I strongly suggest you read the patch notes if you really care about the details and nuances, or read the developer diaries on the Paradox forums, as they do explain most of these changes in pretty good broad strokes, so you have a good overview. All in all, 2.0 is an immensely impressive amount of changes for an already really good game. And that, to my opinion, nearly every single one is a good change. While this does slow down the pace of the game in the mid-game, which I feel was already pretty damn slow in Stellaris, it improves combat, which was always Stellaris' weakest point, it improves map control, and Empire control, which was always Stellaris' weakest point. Those 2 points, they have made massive strides. And I personally feel that the things they've handed in terms of flexibility and warp travel and all that sort of stuff are very much worth it to get this type of strategic 4x grand strategy level of warfare and empire control. So would I recommend Stellaris Apocalypse? The answer is yes, but I'm sure that answer was not surprising. As you already know, I exceedingly love the damn game, and I suggest you check it out. If you haven't, do so now. There is not a better time in the universe than to spend 1,000 hours in a game where you are a three-headed hydra, hive mind technocracy that loves their technology and that sort of really wants to be friends with everyone, but the others, they feel you're not the best friend as you assimilate their empires into your single consciousness. Who knows? Or maybe you're just some cat people that really want to murder. It's up to you. Up to your AI, up to your enemies, and with the amount of mods available that are sadly mostly going to have to be redone for 2.0, this game offers a ton of content for a ton of hours, and with 2.0, it offers more and more of it. Stellaris Apocalypse is coming out on Steam on February 22nd, and you can check it out in the link down below. If you want to see my previous coverage of Stellaris, you can also check that out in the link down below. Lots of links in the description. I strongly urge you to check them out if you are interested in the title, or if you were already interested in the title, to catch up on the various changes. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, press that like button down below. If you didn't like this video, there's a dislike button for exactly that purpose, and leave a comment. Tell me what you think about Stellaris Apocalypse, what you think about the changes to hyperlane traveling, and what you think about a new and improved way of dealing with some pesky aliens. And if you want to see more content like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and I will deliver. So until then, I wish you a good day, and until next time, right here on GuyLogicGaming.